Welcome to Intimate Fame, conversations with the famous and infamous like you have never heard. Success, love, history alive, history undressed, private lives intimately revealed. What if you were there? Now you are invited. Meet extraordinary people as you never have before. One-person stories like no conversation you have ever been part of. Welcome to Intimate Fame. Before Diana, before Meghan, there was the world's most famous royal outcast. That woman, Wallis Simpson, Duchess of Windsor. Episode 1. She won a king's heart in the 40-year romance known around the world as the love story of the 20th century. In December 1936, King Edward VIII abdicated his throne for the twice-divorced American Wallis Simpson. Despite being vilified by the royal family and branded as an adventuress and the king's whore, she became an unlikely but potent global symbol of female empowerment and a worldwide social icon. But even with all that has been written about her, Wallis remained an enigma. Until now. Paris, the Windsor villa, Wallis and David's Parisian drawing room.
I suspect David and I will haunt this place for eternity. Two ghosts from one magnificent love story. Paris. The last Saturday in August 1997. Regretfully, I am dead. On that last Saturday in August 1997, a chauffeured car stopped at a villa in the Bois de Boulogne, 4 Rue du Champ d'Autremont, the Windsor Villa. This villa, which had been our home for many years, was currently owned by the billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. His son, Dodi, and Diana crossed the portico and into this very room. That last Saturday in August 1997 was Diana's second visit. Diana took her time, moving from room to room. London was feeling less and less like home. Paris would revive her, save her, rescue her, as it did me. She was no longer referred to as Her Royal Highness, something I was all too familiar with. Around 5, the couple left, a short stop at Dodi's apartment, then a late supper at the Ritz Hotel. Leaving just after midnight, they were pursued by those hateful paparazzi. 12 hours after wandering through the Windsor Villa, my villa, Diana, desperate for sanctuary, Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead. Hi, I'm Wallis. Please make yourself comfortable. The evening is just beginning. Do you like the dress? Not bad, given it's 1973, right? My God, the 70s. What happened to taste, style? All the great designers seem to have gone into hiding, kidnapped. Fortunately for me, I was good at assembling this and that into a statement. A good trait to have when a life of this and that constantly explodes around you. In truth, my dear David and I were vagabonds. We collected a lot of collectibles, mementos of an exiled life. It has been 1 year since the death of my dear David, Edward, Duke of Windsor. So thank you. I welcome the company. Oh, please, do make yourself comfortable. I have the most wondrous staff to keep your cocktails coming. Shall we have a toast? Yes, a proper toast to begin the evening. For a gallant spirit, there can never be defeat. David and I loved this home. If not entertaining, we dined in the boudoir watching television on trays. I liked quiz shows. Of course, everything was in French. Westerns, Bob Hope, Frank Sinatra, everything. Bob Hope speaking French. It was an absolute scream. That was then, with David. We were known for our entertainment evenings late into the night. Now alone, it's cocktail parties. But they are the most sought-after cocktail party invitations in Paris. I can still manage that. When David and I did entertain, dinner guests were asked to arrive promptly at 8:15. 2 footmen greeted their cars in the portico, opening doors on both sides so no one had to slide across the seat. Flowers filled the foyer. I preferred white arum lilies and orchids draped with trailing ivy. Flowers from the foyer into this very room. My daily life with David. I weighed myself every morning. Breakfast in bed, the way breakfast should be. A lovely morning chat with David, then we would always go our separate ways before lunch. I married for better and for worse, not for lunch. Paris. It has always been my great sanctuary. After our honeymoon, we settled here. There was some peace, but the king still had his thumb on us. Prior to the wedding, David received a letter. I was to be given the title Duchess of Windsor, but denied the usual title of Her Royal Highness. It seemed unnecessarily cruel. The embassy in France was told to ignore us, afraid that acknowledging our lives would raise our stature in society. No one knew to curtsy as the wife of a royal duke or ignore me like the royal family. It made social gatherings awkward for people. No one knew what the hell to call me. It was difficult because people were puzzled about what to do with me. And I knew this hurt my husband. It was a life in limbo. We were royalty, but not treated like we were. None of the advantages and all of the disadvantages. It is so lovely you are here. I thought it prudent to fill you in on a few details. My dears, you do not know the half of it. I am well aware of what you might think of the woman at Edward's side, but there was a woman long before Edward. And I simply don't want people referring back to inaccuracies after I'm dead. They said I was a Russian spy, American spy, German spy, Italian spy. I was mistress to Hitler's and Mussolini's diplomats. Did you know I prostituted myself in Chinese brothels? The mistress of forbidden sexual practices? They said in reality, I was a hermaphrodite. Oh, the press. I was indeed a 2-time divorcee, an American from Baltimore. Spy, mistress, prostitute, hermaphrodite. From my illustrious resume, I'm unsure what the Queen Mother objected to more. It was Baltimore. Where to start? Writing my memoirs, I deliberately altered the date of my parents' wedding. The marriage was November 19th, 1895. I insisted it took place 5 months earlier, in June. I had my reasons. They were my memoirs. They would be what I damned well wanted them to be. Days, months, years. I've always tried to evade actual years. Harder to do the math on me. That said, there is a specific date I do want to mention. April 7th, 1920. The date I met the future king and my future husband. The Hotel del Coronado in San Diego, California. I'm ahead of myself. I'll come back to the Hotel Del. My father was Teco Wallis Warfield, T. Wallis as he called himself. He was a good-looking man, but even at the wedding ceremony, fate was seeping in. Pale color, skin thinning, a faint fog of sickness clouding his eyes, the rough cough breaking apart and interfering with his marriage vows. My father was 25 years old and already dying. Oh dear, that's one hell of a way to start a story, isn't it? Let's get back to Baltimore. Baltimore in the 19th century was a fucking mess. All right, let's get this out of the way. I curse. Not in public, in private. Trust me, you don't marry into royalty without finding yourself using the word fuck. So tonight, this is between us, all right? Confidential. My first husband. Alcoholic, cheater, liar, betrayer, wife-beater. He locked me in our bathroom and left me there. Locked in a bathroom in San Diego, California. San Diego? You didn't think it could get any worse, did you? Earl Winfield Spencer, Jr. Win. A 27-year-old junior grade lieutenant. Officers came around to the commander's house. That is what one did, gather, talk airplanes. I had a little interest. Flying about was not common. But I did like a man in uniform. Wynne stood out. Years later, I realized he stood out for all the wrong reasons. I thought, this is a man who can sweep you up, protect you. My second husband was a kind heart and a sweet soul, and not one primal instinct to halt or challenge an invading future king. He proposed by telegraph. I accepted by telegraph. We were married at the Chelsea Registry Office in London. The setting was more appropriate for a trial than the culmination of a romance. There I go, ahead of myself. Let's get back to fucking Baltimore. There had been the Civil War, and despite being a suburb of the nation's capital, Baltimore in the 19th century was not the United States of America. It was the Confederacy, alive and well, wounds cut deep. My father's family, the Warfields, were well off, not wealthy. There is a difference. During the abdication after my dear David gave up the crown for me, do you know what they said about me? A commoner. No class. No stature. I appeared in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, L'Officiel countless times. I was named one of the top 10 best-dressed women in the world, a distinction I would hold nearly 4 decades. To this day, no one has matched that. Dior, Van Cleef, Alexandra, Cartier. I was always correctly dressed. Never funny, never slouchy, never don't care, always right. And wearing pearls. Baltimore. At the age of 25, my father fell in love. Alice Montague, the daughter of insurance salesman William Montague, and his wife Mary Ann. My father's family, it was stiff upper lip. My mother's family, it was bourbon and gossip. Little mattered in the end whether the Montagues or the Warfields approved of the marriage or not. D. Wallis and Alice were married. 6 months later, Bessie Wallis Warfield was born. Their blessed gift was barreling her way far too soon toward the Baltimore social pages. I was called Bessie after my mother's oldest sister, and Wallis in honor of my father. A Southern custom, both names run together. Bessie Wallis. Bessie. I would not be named after a cow. Bessie Simpson, the Duchess of Windsor, can you imagine? I was barely old enough to walk, but I put my foot down. A compromise was negotiated. Drop the Bessie, I would be Wallis. As a child, I'd never heard of a woman named Wallis, but I wanted it. If you did not know me, you would expect a man to walk into the room. I didn't want to be a man. I wanted to be treated like one. Identity. That was a luxury women of the time could not afford. I'm going to make myself a fresh cocktail. I don't know your background, but the Arundel School for Girls taught me they were always referred to as cocktails, never a drink. know what you're thinking. That's straight whiskey she's pouring. Trust me, my dears, it's still a cocktail. For most of my life, when I walked into a room, it was, "Hi, I'm Wallis." It became my trademark, my personal salvo. The scandalous tabloids were correct when they said I went after men. It wasn't for sex, it was to win in a man's world. I had figured this all out as a child. My family was not pleased with my insight. Another toast. Raise your glasses. You can never be too rich or too thin. Because of my father's illness, I was not allowed to be touched by him. I was kept in another room. I'll give you this about my mother. To knowingly marry for love and death at the very same moment. When my dear David the Duke gave up his anointed life for love, I understood my mother for perhaps the first time ever. 4 days short of her first wedding anniversary, my father was dead. My mother was a 25-year-old widow, on her own, with a newborn child, not a cent to her name. Rescue came in the form of Anna Amory Warfield, my father's mother. My grandmother offered to let us live with her, but not without ulterior motives. My father had an older brother, Solomon, Uncle Saul. He still lived at home, in his 40s, never married. Uncle Saul was unattractive, none of the outward physical traits of my handsome father. But Uncle Saul, he wasn't dead from tuberculosis. He had interest in my mother. She had no interest in him. The day my mother threw aside her widow black to pursue other men, to pursue a life, well, all family kindness ceased. We moved to the Brexton Residential Hotel, a double room in hell. Oh, I must show you something, a photograph. You will love this. Somewhere in this room. Within a year, no father, no funds, my mother was forced to give up our independence and accept an invitation to live with her widow sister, Bessie Merriman. Yes, that Bessie. Ah, I found it. This is my dear Aunt Bessie. By good fortune, Aunt Bessie had never heard my name-changing business about the cow. Poor Aunt Bessie, bless her heart. Look at her mug. Would you tangle with a mug like this? In the end, it was me. Aunt Bessie knew I needed stability. For my well-being, she found sympathy for her sister. A lifetime later, there came in August, Aunt Bessie celebrated her 100th birthday. 100 years and this amazing broad was still around. She didn't want to miss one damn thing. Health prevented us from attending. That November, Aunt Bessie died. I was in the New York hospital for foot surgery. David, my dear David, went to Baltimore for her funeral. If Aunt Bessie had known 30 years earlier that a king would attend her funeral, Aunt Bessie would have thrown up her hands and died right then and there at 70. My mother at 36 had met a man, John Freeman Raisin. He appeared to care a great deal for my mother. He also cared a great deal for smoking and alcohol. She married him. It was called Bright's disease, a very polite way of saying my stepfather was an alcoholic who drank himself to death. I was 18. All of my friends were given a debutante ball. Not for me. We were too poor for a debutante ball. Uncle Saul was a cheapskate and the war was convenient. No ball, no future. I wasn't pretty. I did have style. But it was Baltimore, everyone knew. For all the money and proper young female deportment, I had become inappropriate. And then rescue. A relative had married a Navy man appointed commander of a naval base in a place called Pensacola, Florida. They invited me to vacation. Given my debutante disaster, a place called Pensacola sounded wise. It was the dead of winter in Baltimore. It was warm and sunny in this oddly named town. Pensacola had more than good weather. It had my first husband, Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., Wynne. Naval air was a new concept. Wynne was one of the first aviators. In this small, quiet town, it felt romantic and tragic. The magnificent roar of these biplanes held together by God knows what. Faith. The siren would wail almost daily when a plane crashed and a pilot was killed. The bell tolling. Never knowing which young man would not return to the commander's gatherings, to a dance. Every kiss, perhaps the last. It left an impression. It wasn't a fear of flying that would stay with me for a lifetime. It was the grief of flying. Wynne asked me to marry him, and I accepted. Not the grand vision my mother or the Warfields and Montagues had imagined. You have made the mistake to marry a brooding, dominant Navy man with no family wealth, most likely to die flying any day of the week. I was not going to end my days as a dull Baltimore matron. Our honeymoon was the Greenbrier Hotel in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. In West Virginia, one could not purchase alcohol. Something Wynne missed. Wynne in a dry state on his honeymoon. The irony eluded me at the time. No matter. Wynne had his flask. Wynne would have his flask at his side more often than me. We returned to Pensacola. Henry and Corinne, my savior cousins, were transferred to Washington, leaving me alone with Wynne and his flask. I had hated military life. The constant moving around, the whirlwind of insecurities, strangers, then friends, then strangers again, utterly dependent, hoping, praying for another rescue. China. China was one hell of a rescue. The Navy sent me to China. Hong Kong, Peking, Shanghai. Oh, Shanghai, do not get me started. Shanghai, a narrow layer of heaven on a thick slice of hell. My God, I had never witnessed such social and cultural chaos. Animals on the loose, garbage everywhere. Every other soul you passed you were certain would rob or murder you. Passports, visas, none of it mattered. When I arrived, there were more than 70,000 prostitutes in the city. So many that a guidebook was created. Male opera singers got the big money, then courtesans, tea-house prostitutes, streetwalkers, those found in opium dens, in nail sheds, then sex standing up, sex at the wharves, and finally, sex with sailors. My dears, you don't know the half of it. I'll come back to China. My first rescue from Pensacola came when President Wilson and Congress declared war on Germany. A new naval air station was being readied near Boston. Wynne received orders to go and set it up. Wynne wanted Europe. He got Boston. He was a fighter pilot. All three of his brothers were headed to assignments in Europe. Wynne saw himself left behind. Boston did not improve upon Pensacola. We had a war now. I knew no one, not even a proper naval introduction to be had. I wanted Boston. I did, however, discover murder trials. I stumbled upon a courthouse. They were seating people. I went in. I was hooked. I returned for dozens of slayings. Thank God for the people of Boston murdering one another. It saved my sanity. Boston was short-lived. Wynne exceeded expectations and was given a new assignment, a transfer to California. Another new naval air station across the harbor from San Diego was to be built. While this wasn't the war Wynne wanted, this was big. Change again for Wynne and Wallis. I made strangers into friends. Word came that Wynne's youngest brother had been killed in war. He felt it should have been him. His own mother told him as much. All of this in a little over a year of marriage. I knew it was not going to end well. Wynne sat in the corner with his drinks. It might have been a large naval air base, but it was small-town gossip. Given my life to come, it may be ironic to say this, but I am a very private person. I would do my best to hide it. but gossip tore at my heart. I am naturally gay and flirtatious. I was brought up to believe that one should be as entertaining as one can at a party. I was born for the social life. It was time to show up for my ball. It was the perfect moment for me. I adored the fascinating men. But love? It did not interest me. Wynne had broken apart the concept. As if love was a foreign word I could not translate, nor could anyone translate for me. Another rescue came in the form of a larger-than-life woman named Catherine Bigelow. She was a recent war widow. I was a different kind of widow. We instantly became friends and remained so a lifetime. Shortly after meeting Catherine, my dear cousins, Corinne and Henry, were assigned to San Diego, and now I had them to lean on. But the die was cast, and it did not take long for them to notice Wynne and the situation. Relief came when Wynne was sent to Marchfield in Riverside, California. We agreed I would stay in San Diego. The airbase was but 90 miles away, yet it felt like an ocean of sanity. Now, back to that date I mentioned earlier, an actual date I will refer to, April 7th, 1920. Wynne returned to San Diego because Edward, Prince of Wales, was arriving. The prince was on his way to Australia on the HMS Renown. There was a welcoming party, quite the to-do for sleepy San Diego. There was a parade, a speech to 25,000 people at a local stadium, and there was the infamous evening ball at the Hotel del Coronado. A truly wonderful hotel. I highly recommend it if you haven't been. Oh, my dear, I must show you this. Give me one moment. I saw it looking for Aunt Bessie. I must share it. I've framed the article. Here it is. At the Hotel Del, there is an actual room for private parties called the Duchess's Private Dining Room. This is the actual newspaper. Years later, the San Diego Press declared in print, Mrs. Simpson was wearing a red evening gown that night and stood out so much from the rest of the women that the prince asked to be presented to her. This is all how they say in French. Bullshit. Truth is, I wasn't in San Diego. Never got a glimpse of my future dear David. 7 days earlier, I had boarded a train for Monterey in Northern California. I was to be the guest of Mrs. Jane Selby Hayne of San Francisco at the Del Monte Lodge. I had gone for the polo games, the cocktail conversations. All right. I knew Wynne would be returning for the Prince of Wales event, and I wanted to be as far away as humanly possible. The Hotel Del. I do hate to ruin that Cinderella story. I don't hold that fraudulent fable against them. Really, I don't. If they can rent a few more beds off me, have at it. It really is a marvelous hotel. Do visit. What a lovely evening this is turning out to be, to see you all again. There is so much to tell. Charles, darling, please have the staff freshly fill everyone's cocktail to the brim. We are just getting started. My dears, you don't know the half of it.
This is Scott Edward Smith, the creator of Intimate Fame. Thank you for listening, and join us next time for Episode 2 of That Woman, Wallis Simpson, Duchess of Windsor. Intimate Fame, created by Scott Edward Smith, produced by Howard Gluss. That Woman, written by Scott Edward Smith, performed by Melissa Jobe, sound design and original music by Chesney Hawkes, associate producer Melissa Jobe, original stage production performed at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, performed by Melissa Jobe, directed by Philip William McKinley, produced by Howard Gluss and Sharon Morrill.